Memorial Day was meant to be a time of reflection and respect, honoring those who had given their lives in service to the country. In the small town of Grayson, the day was traditionally marked by a solemn parade, followed by a gathering at the local veterans cemetery. However, this year, the observance was shadowed by events that would forever alter the community's view of this sacred holiday. It started subtly, with whispers among the townsfolk about strange occurrences in the weeks leading up to Memorial Day. Dogs would bark incessantly at the cemetery gates, which had begun to creak and groan even on windless nights. Local children told stories of seeing shadows moving among the tombstones, though adults assured them it was just the trick of the twilight. Elaine Thompson, a reporter for the Grayson Gazette, had always been fascinated by the supernatural, and these rumors piqued her interest. She decided to use the Memorial Day ceremonies as a backdrop for a story exploring these eerie phenomena. Armed with her camera and notebook, Elaine arrived early at the cemetery on the morning of Memorial Day, her senses alert to anything unusual. As the parade concluded and people started to disperse towards the cemetery, the atmosphere changed. The air grew inexplicably colder, a fog rolling in so thickly that it swallowed the sounds of the departing crowd, leaving a silence that was heavy and foreboding. Elaine met with Jared, the cemetery caretaker, a man whose family had tended to the graves for generations. He was a skeptic, dismissing the stories as nothing more than people's overactive imaginations fueled by the cemetery's somber purpose. Every year, it's the same, Jared told Elaine, shaking his head. People get spooked by shadows and the wind. There's nothing here but the dead, and the dead don't bother anyone. Despite his reassurances, as they walked among the gravestones, even Jared couldn't ignore the peculiar chill in the air, or the way the mist seemed to move against the breeze, swirling around certain tombs with an almost sentient purpose. They were near the oldest part of the cemetery when Elaine's camera started to malfunction. The device, fully charged, flickered off and on, the lens focusing on its own accord as if trying to capture something unseen. Frustrated, she gave it a gentle shake, attempting to reset it. "That's strange," she muttered, peering through the viewfinder. "It's like it's picking up something." Jared peered over her shoulder skeptically, just as a cold wind swept through, the mist parting briefly before enveloping them even more thickly. In that instant of clarity, Elaine snapped a photo. The camera whirred and died completely, its screen going black. "What did you see?" Jared asked, his voice tinged with unease. "I'm not sure," Elaine replied, trying to restart her camera. Something was there, in the mist, a figure. They continued their walk, the silence oppressive. Every step seemed to echo through the fog, distorting direction and distance. As they approached the war memorial, a statue of a soldier from World War I, the temperature dropped sharply. Elaine's breath fogged before her, and she shivered, pulling her coat tighter around her. Then, the air was filled with the faint sound of a bugle, the notes mournful and distant. Jared froze, his face pale. That's the taps," he stammered. "But who would be playing it now?" The music grew louder, enveloping them in sound. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, disorienting them further. Elaine, though frightened, lifted her phone to record the audio, her reporter's instinct overcoming her fear. As the last note quivered in the air, a voice whispered through the mist, so faintly it could have been mistaken for the wind, "Find us." Jared and Elaine looked at each other, the same thought mirrored in their eyes. They needed to understand what was happening, to uncover the truth behind these disturbances. Their investigation led them deeper into the cemetery, to the graves of soldiers from various conflicts. It was here that the anomalies intensified. Personal effects placed on the graves, flags, medals, photographs, began to move as if touched by invisible hands. The ground beneath their feet trembled subtly, a vibration that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of a heartbeat. As night approached, the mist grew denser, the darkness absolute. Elaine and Jared, determined not to leave until they had answers, found themselves standing before a neglected grave, its headstone cracked and partially obscured by overgrown weeds. Here, the air was charged, electric. Suddenly, the ground before the grave shifted, as if something below was stirring. A hand, spectral and pale, broke through the earth, reaching upwards, grasping for life. The sight froze Elaine and Jared in their tracks, their breaths caught in their throats. The hand hung in the air for a moment, then slowly retracted back into the soil, leaving a new silence more profound than before. Both knew they were far beyond the realm of ordinary explanations, each pulse of the unseen heart beneath the cemetery soil deepening the horror of their reality. Elaine, despite her fear, moved closer to the disturbed grave, her journalistic instinct driving her to uncover every layer of this chilling mystery. Jared, less willing but driven by a sense of duty to his role as caretaker, followed hesitantly. The air thickened, a tangible weight pressing down on them as if the very atmosphere sought to expel them from this sacred ground. Another whisper floated through the air, clearer this time, an urgent, pleading whisper, "Help us, release." Elaine, her hand trembling, managed to record this new audio, the voice echoing in the playback, each syllable a chilling confirmation of their supernatural encounter. They decided to mark the grave, planning to return with help, perhaps someone versed in spiritual matters or paranormal investigations. As they turned to leave, a sudden gust of wind swept through the cemetery, the fog swirling violently around them, obscuring their path. When it settled, the landscape had changed. The familiar paths were gone, replaced by an unending stretch of tombstones that seemed to stretch into infinity. It was as if the cemetery itself had become a labyrinth designed to trap them. Elaine and Jared wandered through the eerie maze, each turn taking them deeper into a world unbound by the rules of physics and logic. Time seemed distorted, the moon hanging impossibly large in the sky, its light casting grotesque shadows that twisted and writhed on the ground like living things. Suddenly, from the depths of the fog, figures began to emerge. At first, they were indistinct, mere shadows, but as they drew closer, the details became horrifyingly clear. Soldiers from different eras, their uniforms torn and bloodied, their faces gaunt and hollow-eyed, surrounded them. The figures did not speak but simply stared with eyes that reflected profound sorrow and pain. Elaine, heart-pounding, tried to communicate, asking who they were and what had bound them to this forsaken place. The figures remained silent, their presence oppressive, almost accusatory. It was as though their inability to communicate added to the weight of their suffering. Driven by a desperate need to escape and find answers, Elaine and Jared finally found their way out of the spectral assembly and stumbled upon an old mausoleum. The structure was decrepit, the stone cracked and overgrown with ivy, and the iron gate creaked ominously as they pushed it open. Inside, the air was musty, thick with the smell of decay and old earth. The faint glow of their flashlights revealed rows of names engraved in the stone, many dating back centuries. It was a record of the town's dead, a history in stone and silence. As they moved deeper into the mausoleum, they heard a low moan, a sound of such despair and suffering that it chilled their blood. It seemed to come from beneath the floor, a sorrowful lament that resonated with the very walls of the crypt. The ground vibrated under their feet, a slow, rhythmic thud that matched the heartbeat they had felt earlier. Elaine, overcome with a sense of dread, realized that whatever haunted this cemetery was ancient, its roots as deep as the town's history. They found a set of old, rusted tools lying on the floor, shovels, a pickaxe, and a rope, left as if discarded in haste. The implication was clear. Something or someone had tried to unearth a secret buried deep within this crypt, a secret so terrifying it had been abandoned. Jared, his face pale and drawn, looked at Elaine. "We need to come back, with more people, with equipment. We need to find out what's under here." Elaine nodded, her resolve steeling. "Yes, and we need to do it soon. Whatever's happening here, it's getting stronger. We can't let this go." As they prepared to leave, the moaning grew louder, more insistent. It was as if the mausoleum itself was begging them not to leave, not to abandon the souls that lingered in its shadows. The walk back to the cemetery gates felt longer than before, the fog denser, the night deeper. When they finally emerged from the cemetery, the early morning light was just beginning to pierce the fog, a pale reminder that the world of the living awaited their return. But Elaine and Jared knew they could not simply return to their lives. The events of the night had changed them, had bound them to the mystery of the cemetery just as surely as the spirits were bound to the land. As they left the gates behind, a final whisper floated through the fog, enveloping them one last time: return, uncover, free us. This chilling entreaty echoed in their minds as they made their way back through the quiet streets of Grayson, the town still asleep, oblivious to the spectral drama that had unfolded just beyond its peaceful veneer. The next few days were a flurry of preparation and research. Elaine and Jared gathered a team composed of local historians, paranormal experts, and a few brave souls curious enough to join the nocturnal expedition. They equipped themselves with more sophisticated recording devices, ground-penetrating radar, and, at the insistence of a local priest, some blessed objects. The team met at dusk at Elaine's small office at the Grayson Gazette. The walls were lined with maps of the town and old photographs of memorial days past, a stark contrast to the dark tale they were about to delve deeper into. Elaine briefed them on their findings, her voice steady but her hands betraying her nervousness as she flipped through her notes. As far as we can tell, something beneath the cemetery is causing these disturbances. It's not just about ghosts, it's about why they can't leave. Our goal tonight is to find out what that is, Elaine explained, her eyes scanning the room, meeting the gaze of each team member. The group set out as the sky turned from twilight to deep night, the stars obscured by a creeping mist that seemed to rise in anticipation of their arrival. The gates of the cemetery groaned as they opened, a sound now ominously familiar to Elaine and Jared. With every step into the cemetery, the air grew colder, the mist thicker. It swirled around their feet, creeping up like living tendrils, as if trying to slow their progress. The beam from their flashlights cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows that danced just beyond their pool of light. They made their way to the mausoleum first. The ground-penetrating radar was set up outside its entrance, a small screen flickering as it began to scan the earth below. The historian, a middle-aged man named Dr. Collins, explained the readings with a growing sense of unease. "The patterns here don't make sense," he murmured, adjusting the equipment. "It's like there's a void beneath us, but it's shifting, almost like it's breathing." As they entered the mausoleum, the door closing with a resounding echo behind them, the moaning began again. It was louder, more desperate this time, a sound that tugged at the edges of their sanity. The paranormal experts set up their equipment, EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, recorders, and EMF, electromagnetic field, meters, which immediately began to spike erratically. "This place is highly active," one of the experts, a woman named Marissa, whispered, her voice a mix of excitement and fear. "I've never seen readings like these." They proceeded deeper into the mausoleum, the air stagnant with the smell of mold and decay. The historian, Dr. Collins, paused by a particularly ancient tomb, his flashlight illuminating an inscription that had been worn away by time. "These are the founders of Grayson," he said, tracing the stone with his finger. "If there's a secret here, it might be with them." As they contemplated this, a sudden scream shattered the silence. It came from the back of the group, where one of the younger volunteers had been standing watch. They rushed over to find him staring at the wall, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. It moved," he stammered, pointing at the stone wall. "The stone, it breathed." Before they could respond, a deep rumbling filled the mausoleum, the ground shaking under their feet. Cracks spiderwebbed across the floor, dust and small stones raining down from the ceiling. The rumbling grew into a roar, a sound so loud it was as if the earth itself was crying out. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos ceased. The team stood in stunned silence, the only sound their heavy breathing and the soft static from the EVP recorders. On the screen of the ground-penetrating radar, a new image had appeared, a large, cavernous space directly beneath the mausoleum, its edges blurry and undefined. "It's a chamber," Dr. Collins said, his voice barely a whisper. Something is down there." Elaine looked at Jared, her resolve returning. "We need to find a way in," she said, her voice steady despite the lingering echoes of the earth's cry. "Whatever is down there, it's the key to all of this." As they prepared to explore further, setting up ropes and gathering their courage, the mist outside began to seep into the mausoleum through the cracks in the ancient stone. It moved with purpose, enveloping each member of the team, whispering secrets long forgotten by the living but remembered by the land. The mist seemed almost alive, its tendrils curling around their ankles, pulling tighter like a living thing trying to communicate. Every so often, a cold spot would pass right through them, chilling them to their bones, making the hairs on the back of their necks stand up in primal fear. As they rigged the ropes to descend into the newly discovered chamber, the EVP recorders began to pick up whispers. They were disjointed at first, hard to make out over the static, but gradually they formed coherent sentences. "Beneath lies the truth, free us from the darkness, do not forsake us." Marissa, the paranormal expert, listened closely, headphones clamped tight over her ears, her eyes wide as she scribbled notes frantically. "There's a lot of activity," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "It's like this place is a nexus for spiritual energy. Whatever's down there has been calling out for a long time." With the rope secured, Elaine volunteered to descend first. She was determined to face whatever lay below, driven by a reporter's instinct to uncover the story, no matter the danger. Jared followed, along with two others from the team, their flashlights piercing the darkness below. The chamber was vast, larger than they had anticipated, the beams of their flashlights unable to reach the far walls. The air was thick, oppressive, and stale, filled with the scent of earth and decay. It was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears, tangible and heavy. As they explored the chamber, their lights fell upon walls covered in markings. They were old, incredibly old, etchings that told stories of sorrow and longing, of lives lost and spirits bound to the shadowy depths. Dr. Collins, still above and peering down into the chamber, relayed information about the symbols. "They're not just decorative, they're ritualistic," he called down. This might have been a place of significant spiritual importance, maybe a burial chamber or a site for rites meant to bind spirits here. The revelation sent a shiver through the team, the implications dawning on them. They were standing in a forgotten sanctum, possibly teetering on the edge of an abyss much deeper than the physical hole they had climbed into. Their exploration led them deeper into the chamber, where they discovered an altar-like structure at the center. It was covered in dust and debris, but clear enough to see that it was stained with what could only be blood, long dried and turned black with age. At this discovery, the temperature dropped drastically, breaths visible in the air as they exhaled. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Release us, end the binding." Elaine approached the altar, her recorder in hand, when suddenly the ground trembled beneath them. It wasn't like before, this was a focused vibration, as if something beneath them was waking up. The chamber seemed to contract, the walls inching closer, the ceiling pressing down. The team, gripped by a fear that was almost palpable, watched in horror as the earth around the altar began to shift. Slowly, as if compelled by some unseen force, the dirt began to move away on its own, revealing a lower layer of stone slabs. "What is this place?" Jared whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of shifting earth. Marissa, ever the investigator despite her fear, was quick to respond. "It's like a seal. We might be standing right above something that was meant to be kept down here." The team was silent, each member processing the gravity of their discovery. They were no longer just witnesses to paranormal phenomena, they were participants in an ancient story, unraveling threads that had been woven long before the first stone of the cemetery was laid. As they stood there, the air grew colder and the whispers louder. A figure began to materialize in front of the altar, its form vague and shifting, its presence overwhelming. It was a manifestation of anguish and entrapment, a spirit bound to the chamber, its essence intertwined with the darkness. The figure pointed towards the altar, its voice echoing in their minds. "Free us, break the seal." Elaine stepped forward, her resolve hardened by the spirit's plea. She knew what they needed to do, but the path to freeing these tormented souls was fraught with unknown dangers. As she set her hand against the cold stone of the altar, ready to push, to disrupt whatever ancient magic held the spirits captive, the ground beneath them shook violently, a warning, or perhaps a plea, to stop. The air crackled with energy, the shadows deepened, and as Elaine looked back at her team, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of their flashlights, She knew they were about to cross a threshold from which there might be no return. As the earth trembled, and the shadows danced like mad specters around the chamber walls, the figure's form became more defined, its features wrought with eternal grief and anger. It was as if the chamber itself was alive, breathing in sync with the rising dread of the team. Push forward, break the chains of time, the figure intoned, its voice a mixture of despair and hope. The walls of the chamber seemed to pulsate with a dull light, illuminating centuries-old frescoes that depicted scenes of both reverence and horror. Elaine, her hand still on the altar, felt a surge of energy through her veins, as if the very touch of the stone connected her to the history of tormented souls trapped within its confines. With a determined breath, she pushed against the altar, and to her shock, it began to slide with a grating sound, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. The air erupted with whispers and cries, a cacophony of voices that seemed to plead and warn at the same time. From the compartment, a gust of wind emerged, carrying with it a decayed smell of old earth and a sudden increase in temperature. The team staggered back, the intensity of the chamber's atmosphere multiplying. Jared clutched at his chest, his breath coming in short gasps. "It's overwhelming," he managed to say, his voice lost amidst the whirling air. Marissa, with her equipment now going haywire, tried to document every anomaly, though the readings were off the charts. "This energy, it's not just spiritual, it's primal, ancient," she shouted over the din. As the altar's compartment lay open, a dark object became visible amongst the dirt and stones. It was a box, old and bound in iron straps, covered in symbols that seemed to shimmer with an unearthly light. The sight of it alone was enough to send a wave of dread through everyone present. Elaine, driven by a force she couldn't understand, reached for the box. Her fingers had barely touched the iron when a scream pierced the chamber, a scream that did not belong to any member of the team. It was a scream of liberation mixed with torment, echoing through the chamber and shaking its very foundations. The ground beneath them shook violently, throwing them off balance. The chamber walls began to crack, small pebbles falling like raindrops, a prelude to a possible collapse. "We need to get out," Jared yelled, but his voice was drowned out by another, more powerful sound, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from below the chamber. Ignoring the danger, Elaine grasped the box and pulled it from its resting place. As she did, the chamber was filled with a blinding light. The figures on the frescoes seemed to move, reliving their ancient sorrows and joys in a dance of shadows and light. The team, now scrambling towards the ropes to escape, watched in horror and awe as the figure by the altar, its form clearer now, began to dissipate, its expression one of gratitude and profound relief. "Be free," it whispered, its voice fading into the winds that now swept through the chamber. With the box in hand, Elaine made her way to the ropes, the ground still trembling underfoot, threatening to split open any moment. The cries and whispers of the chamber grew fainter as the light dimmed, the energy seeming to ebb with the removal of the box. As they ascended out of the chamber, the night air hit them with a chill, the fog thicker than before, as if it aimed to envelop everything, including the truths they had unearthed. The cemetery was silent, the mist swirling around the gravestones like protective spirits watching over the sleeping town. Back on the surface, the team gathered around Elaine, who held the box tightly. Its surface was cool to the touch, the symbols glowing faintly under the moonlight. The implications of their discovery were overwhelming, each member of the team processing the night's events in their own way. "We've done something monumental," Elaine said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion and fear. "This might just be the beginning." As they prepared to leave the cemetery, with plans to study the box and its secrets, a low growl echoed from the open mausoleum, a reminder that some things might have been better left undisturbed. The fog thickened, wrapping the cemetery in a blanket of white, obscuring their path back to the world they knew. As they ventured into the mist, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them, they understood that the story of what lay beneath the last course was far from over. The fog seemed to thicken with every step they took away from the mausoleum, enveloping the team in a dense, almost tangible shroud that muffled sounds and distorted distances. The town of Grayson lay ahead, but it felt worlds away from the unearthly events they had just experienced. As they reached the outskirts of the cemetery, Elaine paused, her gaze drawn back to the shadowy gates that marked its entrance. The air was charged with a residual energy, as if the cemetery itself was alive, aware of the secrets that had been disturbed beneath its soil. She clutched the iron-bound box tighter, a shiver running down her spine. "We need to research this immediately," she said, turning to face the group. "Whatever is in this box might explain the paranormal activity, and possibly how to put an end to it." The team nodded in agreement, the weight of responsibility evident on their faces. Jared, looking particularly shaken, added, "We should also keep this quiet until we know more. If word gets out about what we found, it could cause a panic, or worse, attract the wrong kind of attention." Marissa, still reviewing the data from her equipment, looked up. The energy levels were off the charts. "Whatever's inside that box, it's powerful. We need to handle it with extreme care." The drive back to town was silent, each member of the team lost in their thoughts, processing the night's terrifying discoveries. Upon arriving at Elaine's office at the Grayson Gazette, they set up a makeshift lab, arranging the necessary tools to safely examine the box. As they began their work, the symbols on the box started to glow faintly, casting eerie shadows on the walls of the office. Dr. Collins, who had been examining the symbols closely, suddenly stepped back, his face pale. "These symbols, they're not just for protection or containment," he stammered. "They're a warning. This box was meant to never be opened." Elaine felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Collins took a deep breath, steadying himself before explaining. "It's a binding. These symbols are used to seal something inside, something that was considered extremely dangerous. Opening this could unleash whatever's been trapped." The team exchanged nervous glances. The responsibility of their discovery weighed heavily on them, the potential consequences of their actions becoming terrifyingly clear. Despite the warning, the need for answers was too great. With extreme caution, Elaine, guided by Dr. Collins's instructions, began the process to open the box. The air grew colder with each passing moment, the atmosphere charged with a palpable tension. Finally, with the last turn of the ancient lock, the lid creaked open. A rush of cold air escaped, filling the room with the musty scent of decay. Inside the box, wrapped in a black cloth, was an object that pulsed with a dark energy, a small, intricately carved stone idol. The idol's eyes, made of some shimmering gemstone, seemed to glow with an inner light, casting an ominous gaze upon the group. As soon as the idol was exposed, the electrical equipment in the room flickered and went dead. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, and the ground beneath them trembled slightly. "We need to reseal it," Jared said, his voice urgent. "Now." But before they could act, a shadowy form materialized in the corner of the room, growing in size and intensity. It was as if the opening of the box had torn a hole into another realm, and now something was coming through. The form became more defined, a spectral figure cloaked in darkness, its eyes burning with a malevolent light. It stared at the idol, then at the team, its gaze filled with ancient hatred and hunger. Elaine, realizing the gravity of their mistake, moved to close the box, but the figure raised its hand, an invisible force stopping her movements. "You have freed me," it spoke, its voice echoing like thunder, yet chillingly clear. "For centuries I was bound, but now I shall reclaim this world." The team, frozen in place by the entity's power, could only watch in horror as it began to move towards them, the air around it crackling with dark energy. As the figure advanced, the ground shaking with each of its steps, Elaine's mind raced. They had unwittingly unleashed a force they did not understand, a force that could not be easily contained. They needed to find a way to reverse their actions, to rebind the entity before it was too late. With the entity drawing closer, its power growing with every second, Elaine's eyes fell on the idol, a desperate plan forming in her mind. If they could somehow use the idol to lure the entity back into the box. Gathering her courage, she whispered to her team, "Help me distract it, I have an idea." Quickly, she explained her plan. Jared and Marissa would use the remaining electronic equipment to generate noise and light, hopefully drawing the entity's attention, while she and Dr. Collins attempted to reposition the idol inside the box. As Jarrett fiddled with the equipment, managing to restart a generator, bright lights flickered to life, and a high-pitched feedback wailed from the speakers. The entity paused, turning its menacing gaze towards the disturbance, its form flickering under the assault of light and sound. Seizing the moment, Elaine grabbed the idol, feeling a surge of icy energy as she touched it. Dr. Collins helped her, his hands trembling as they placed the idol back into the box. The entity roared, a sound that shook the office as it realized their intentions. "Close it now!" Dr. Collins shouted, his voice barely audible over the entity's cries. Elaine slammed the box's lid shut, twisting the ancient lock into place. The glow from the idol's eyes dimmed, the hum subsided, and the air began to warm as the room fell silent except for the team's heavy breathing. For a moment, there was stillness, the entity's shadowy form hovering, diminished and uncertain. Then, with a final, resentful glare, it dissipated, absorbed back into the darkness from whence it came. The team collapsed, exhausted and relieved, the danger averted but the weight of their experience heavy on their minds. The box, once again sealed, sat benignly on the table, its contents restrained but still pulsing with a subdued power. "We need to ensure this never happens again," Elaine said, her voice firm despite her fatigue. "This box needs to be guarded and hidden, away from those who might unwittingly unleash what's inside." Dr. Collins nodded in agreement. "I'll contact some colleagues who specialize in ancient artifacts and containment. We'll find a safe place for it, somewhere secure and unknown." As dawn broke, casting light through the office windows, the team looked at each other, their bond strengthened by the ordeal they had endured. They had faced the unknown, confronted a darkness beyond their understanding, and emerged victorious, though not unscathed. Elaine took one last look at the box before it was taken away, a sense of foreboding lingering in her heart. They had contained the entity, but she knew the world was full of hidden terrors waiting to be discovered, each with its own story, its own dangers. As she wrote her article for the Grayson Gazette, Elaine chose her words carefully, omitting the darkest details of their experience. The public knew something had happened that night, something strange and unsettling, but the full truth was something she believed the world was not ready to face. The article ended on a note of caution, a warning veiled in the guise of a conclusion: as we honor our past, we must also respect its secrets. Some doors, once opened, may lead us into shadows from which there is no return. The story of the Memorial Day horror would live on in whispers and rumors, its truth known only to those who had witnessed it, a haunting memory of the night when the veil between worlds was torn and the darkness peered back.